Imagine telling a billionaire their wedding look is simple. That's exactly what one wedding planner did. But she was about to discover just how wrong she was. Regina Matthews leaned back in her leather office chair, her eyes scanning over the wedding plans spread out before her. The mood boards were vibrant with images of extravagant flowers, luxurious gowns, and gilded chandeliers, everything that had made her name synonymous with high-end weddings. Her clients were some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world, each one expecting the kind of wedding that could take a month to plan and cost millions to execute. She adjusted her glasses, checking the time. The door to her office creaked open, and Regina glanced up. Normally, the grandiose entrances of her clients made her smile. They arrived in designer dresses, their bodyguards trailing behind them like shadows. But today, something felt different. A woman entered the room, and Regina's immediate thought was, "This can't be my client." The woman didn't have the aura of wealth Regina was accustomed to. She wasn't wearing a gown, nor did she even have on a statement piece of jewelry. Instead, the woman wore a modest, unassuming pale blue dress, one that seemed too simple for someone who was supposed to be royalty in the world of high society. Her heels barely made a sound as she walked into the room, and Regina couldn't help but notice how humble she looked. "Is this really the client I'm supposed to meet today?" "Hello, I'm Charlotte Davenport," the woman said, her voice soft, but with an air of quiet confidence. She extended a hand, which Regina shook hesitantly, still processing her appearance. "Charlotte Davenport," Regina repeated under her breath, trying to place the name, Davenport. That name sounded familiar. She couldn't place it immediately, but something told her that this was a name that should have commanded a sense of recognition. However, Charlotte didn't have the flashy demeanor of a typical billionaire bride. There were no diamonds, no couture dress, no air of superiority. She was dressed simply, almost plainly, and appeared to have arrived alone. Regina quickly ushered Charlotte to the plush velvet chair across from her desk, all the while trying to keep her composure. She expected someone like Charlotte to demand the most expensive wedding the world could offer, an affair fit for royalty. But this was unexpected. "Please, have a seat," Regina said, forcing a warm smile onto her face. She wanted to make sure she didn't let her surprise show. "I've been looking forward to working with you." "Thank you for meeting with me," Charlotte replied, her smile gentle but assured. "I'm really excited to get started on planning my wedding." Regina immediately pulled up her digital planner, ready to dive into the wedding details. She expected to hear the usual extravagant venues, extravagant gowns, extravagant everything. After all, Charlotte must have come from a family that understood luxury, right? "So, tell me," Regina began, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "What's your vision for your wedding? Any ideas on the location, the theme, the size of the guest list?" Charlotte hesitated, as if considering how best to phrase her request. "I don't need anything extravagant," she said softly. "I want something simple. A few close friends, a peaceful setting, maybe a garden or a small, intimate space, something quiet." Regina's fingers stilled. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard that correctly. Simple, intimate. Her mind raced. Was this some sort of trick? Maybe Charlotte had just arrived with a very modest request, but she was really aiming for a massive event later on. Maybe she was one of those people who, after pretending to want simplicity, would demand diamonds the size of a grapefruit by the end of the conversation. But Charlotte's calm, unassuming demeanor didn't suggest any trickery. She just looked serene, at peace with her decision. Regina leaned forward slightly, her fingers tapping the desk in a rhythmic motion as she thought of how to proceed. "Well, of course, I can help with that," Regina said, though her voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "But just so I understand, simple is what you want, right? A small, intimate gathering." Charlotte nodded, her expression warm. "Yes, that's right. I don't need a grand ballroom or a designer gown. I just want the ceremony to reflect the love between my partner and I, that's all." Regina was taken aback. She had worked on weddings for other billionaires before, but those were far from simple. One recent client had asked for a helicopter to drop them off at the wedding venue, while another had demanded a choir of angels singing as she walked down the aisle. And now, Charlotte, one of the wealthiest women in the world, if she was indeed the Charlotte Davenport Regina was thinking of, was asking for a wedding that barely resembled the affairs Regina was used to organizing. "Are you sure?" Regina pressed. She couldn't let go of the idea that this might be a joke. A simple wedding is a lovely idea, but surely we can make it more memorable. A stunning wedding dress, maybe. A venue that will leave people talking for years. Charlotte's smile remained, but her gaze was steady, almost peaceful. I've thought about it a lot. What I want isn't a show for the public. I want a private celebration with people I love, in a space where I can focus on the moment. I want it to be real. Regina felt a mixture of confusion and concern wash over her. This isn't how it's supposed to be. How could someone with this much money, someone who could literally buy an entire country if she wanted, to ask for such a modest celebration? It didn't make sense. Her mind couldn't fathom why Charlotte didn't want a lavish event. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle of it. People like Charlotte, people who had everything, should want to flaunt that wealth, shouldn't they? But Charlotte was insisting on the opposite. Regina pushed forward. I completely understand what you're saying, Charlotte, but I do think that a wedding is also a reflection of who you are. You deserve something that shows your status, something that makes a statement. Charlotte paused, her hands folded gently in her lap. I don't need my wedding to be a statement, she said quietly. I need it to be an experience, a day that I can cherish. We have so much already. What we really need is time and memories, not things. Regina was quiet for a moment, absorbing Charlotte's words. For the first time, she realized something. Charlotte didn't need the showy displays of wealth that Regina was so used to. She was far beyond that. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was about a woman who had learned that real richness came from love, not things. Charlotte's simple request, so gracefully presented, felt like a challenge to Regina's entire world. How had I missed this? She thought. She had been so focused on her vision of luxury that she couldn't see what was standing right in front of her. A bride who didn't care about the trappings of wealth, but about the purity of the moment. Okay, Charlotte, Regina finally said, her voice steady but thoughtful. We can do that. We'll keep it simple, and I'll make sure everything reflects the beauty of what you want. Charlotte's smile widened, but there was something more profound behind it. She nodded, clearly satisfied. Thank you, Regina. I appreciate your understanding. And just like that, Regina knew that this wedding would be like no other. She had thought she understood wealth, but now she realized there was a deeper layer to it, one that she wasn't yet prepared to fully comprehend. Regina Matthews sat back in her chair, still processing the surprising turn the meeting had taken. She had been in the wedding business for years, dealing with the ultra-wealthy on a daily basis. There was one thing she had learned: wealth was often about excess. The grander the wedding, the more impressive the show, the better. It was almost a given that anyone with the kind of money Charlotte Davenport supposedly had would want to flaunt it. After all, when you could buy anything you wanted, didn't you want the world to see it? But Charlotte had thrown that notion out the window. Her request had been as simple as it was confusing. A wedding with no grandeur, no over-the-top displays, no extravagance, just peace, intimacy, and the people she loved most. Regina couldn't help but wonder, was this some sort of phase? Would Charlotte come to her senses and ask for a multi-million-dollar affair once she saw all the options available? Trying to shake off her confusion, Regina gathered her thoughts and decided to press on. This wedding still had to be perfect, even if it wasn't going to be what I'm used to, she thought, and with that, she decided to give Charlotte one more chance to embrace the world of wealth that Regina had come to understand so well. So Charlotte, Regina began, her voice more controlled now. I understand that you want something simple, but just think for a second. This is a once-an event, and it's your chance to create a memory that will last forever. Don't you want something a little more extravagant? Regina's tone was smooth, but there was a hint of persuasion in it, as if she was trying to lure Charlotte into the fold of luxury. Charlotte, who had been sitting quietly with a calm expression, didn't seem fazed by the question. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers interlaced in front of her. I've thought about it a lot, Regina, she said, her voice soft but firm, and I know that what I want is different from what most people would expect. I just don't believe in spending millions on a wedding just to make it look like something it's not. It's about what happens on that day, not how much it costs. Regina's lips pressed together as she listened. She's just being stubborn, Regina thought, her patience thinning. She doesn't get it. She's too rich to be thinking like this. She has the money, but she's treating it like it's not important. She cleared her throat, determined not to give up just yet. I completely understand your desire for simplicity, Regina said, but there was a subtle edge to her voice now. But let me be clear. Charlotte, luxury doesn't just happen without a little extra investment. If you want it to be simple but still have that sense of elegance, we can do it. But there are certain elements you can't skimp on. She gestured to her desk, where a stack of mood boards lay with photos of opulent venues, couture gowns, and over-the-top flower arrangements. Each image screamed luxury and excess. But Regina knew it was exactly what Charlotte needed. Imagine a custom wedding gown, designed just for you, something breathtaking. A venue with chandeliers dripping with crystals, flowers in every color of the rainbow, and of course, a guest list full of your closest friends and family. This is the kind of wedding you deserve. Charlotte's gaze never wavered, but there was a quiet calm in her expression that Regina couldn't read. She simply shook her head, her voice unshaken. I've thought about all of that, she replied, softly, but it's not what I want. I want a wedding that is meaningful, that reflects who I am, not who I could be if I wore a diamond tiara or had 1,000 guests. Regina felt her patience start to wear thin. She's not listening. She's not hearing me, she thought. I understand you want meaning, but meaning and luxury aren't mutually exclusive, Regina said, her tone becoming a little sharper. I'm sure you've heard the saying, you get what you pay for. A wedding of this caliber, simple but elegant, won't be cheap. She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on her desk. If you want your day to truly shine, it requires investment. But Charlotte remained calm, unwavering in her decision. I know what I'm asking for, Regina, and I'm not trying to insult your expertise. I just don't believe that spending millions will make it more special. What's important is that we're surrounded by people who love us, in a space that feels intimate and personal. That's where the true luxury lies, for me, at least. Regina, whose job had always been about making her clients' dreams a reality, no matter how lavish those dreams were, was finding herself at a loss for words. This wasn't supposed to be hard. It should have been a straightforward conversation. The kind of conversation where the client asked for something extravagant and Regina made it happen. But here she was, trying to convince a billionaire bride to spend less, to embrace simplicity, when all her instincts screamed that this wasn't the way it was supposed to be. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, trying to mask her frustration. I'm not sure you fully understand the implications of what you're asking for, Regina said, her voice now laced with a note of concern. You can have something simple, of course, but there's a reason people spend millions on weddings. It's not just about showing off wealth, it's about creating an experience that will be unforgettable. Charlotte met her gaze without flinching, her eyes filled with an understanding that Regina couldn't quite grasp. I don't need an unforgettable experience, Regina. I need a meaningful one. Regina's mind was spinning. Charlotte's calm, unwavering demeanor was starting to unsettle her. Regina was used to seeing excitement in her clients, used to seeing them swept up in the idea of having the most glamorous, over-the-top event imaginable. But Charlotte didn't seem at all fazed by the thought of having a wedding that could be considered simple. I think you're underestimating the value of simplicity, Regina said, the edge in her voice now unmistakable. A truly elegant wedding, the kind you're asking for, will still cost a significant amount of money. There's no way around that. You may not be interested in a flashy celebration, but that doesn't mean we won't need to make some serious investments to get the right vibe. Charlotte simply nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. I'm aware of what it will cost, she said, but I'm not interested in spending money just for the sake of it. Regina stared at her, her thoughts racing. She just doesn't get it. Charlotte wasn't some naive young bride who didn't understand how the world worked. She was an incredibly wealthy woman, and yet she was willingly choosing to reject all the trappings of luxury. It didn't make sense. How can someone with so much reject it all? Finally, Regina sighed. All right, Charlotte, she said, her voice softer now, but still tinged with frustration. If this is really what you want, we can try to make it happen. But I need you to understand that it may not be as easy as it sounds. There will still be costs associated with even the most simple wedding. Charlotte's smile deepened, and for the first time, Regina saw something in her eyes, a quiet confidence, a strength that Regina hadn't expected. I'm prepared for that, Charlotte said, but I'm also prepared to have a wedding that's meaningful to me and my partner. Regina nodded slowly, though the doubt still lingered in her mind. This wasn't the wedding she had envisioned for Charlotte, but if she could make it work, maybe she could learn something new about what true wealth really meant, but for now, she was still unsure. Regina had built her career on extravagant weddings, ones that people would talk about for years. A wedding like this, it didn't seem like it would have that kind of impact. But then again, perhaps that was the point. As the meeting ended, Regina still felt unsettled. She had a job to do, but Charlotte's request had opened a door to something she wasn't entirely sure she was ready to understand. The days that followed were a blur for Regina Matthews. She had always prided herself on her ability to read people, especially her clients. She could tell when someone was putting on an act, pretending to be modest when they really wanted the extravagant. But Charlotte Davenport, she was a puzzle Regina couldn't quite solve. The more Regina tried to convince her to embrace luxury, the more resolute Charlotte became in her decision. It wasn't just the simplicity of the wedding that Charlotte wanted, it was the depth, the authenticity, and Regina wasn't sure how to reconcile that with her high-end wedding world. Regina had tried everything, every angle, every possible suggestion. She suggested a custom gown, something that would make headlines for its understated elegance. Charlotte turned it down. Regina tried again, this time proposing a small venue with breathtaking views, perfect for an intimate gathering. Charlotte didn't bite. Each time, Charlotte smiled, almost apologetically, and gently reiterated the same message. It's not about the extravagance, Regina. It's about the people, the vows, the connection. Regina felt herself growing, frustrated. It was as though Charlotte was rejecting everything Regina had worked so hard to perfect over the years. Every wedding Regina had planned, every client she had worked with, was about luxury, about making a statement. But Charlotte seemed to be telling her that luxury wasn't in the things, but in the moments. It was one afternoon, several days later, that Regina would find herself standing face to face with the one thing she had never expected, the true nature of Charlotte's wealth. The meeting that day had started much like the others. Charlotte walked into Regina's office, looking as poised and unassuming as ever. Her soft blue dress was still the same modest outfit she had worn during their first meeting. No diamonds, no flashy accessories, just an air of quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room. Regina stood to greet her, but the smile she forced didn't quite reach her eyes. "Charlotte," she said, trying to sound cordial but feeling the weight of frustration creeping into her tone. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I believe we can certainly do something simple for your wedding. But I think there's a way to combine simplicity with elegance. A minimalistic venue with a little more emphasis on the design, on the details." Charlotte, as always, nodded gently, but didn't seem convinced. Her calm, steady gaze met Regina's, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though she could see straight through Regina's carefully constructed persona. "I appreciate that, Regina," Charlotte replied, her voice quiet yet firm. "But I don't need an extravagant design. I just want the day to reflect who we are, and that doesn't require the show." Regina let out a soft sigh, clearly struggling with the disconnect between her worldview and Charlotte's. "But Charlotte, you have the means to make this day extraordinary. You don't have to choose simplicity if it's not what you really want. No one would blame you for going all out. It's what people like you do. It's expected." She hesitated for a moment before continuing, her voice a little softer now. "Isn't there something inside you that wants that too? To make a statement, to be noticed?" Charlotte's expression didn't change. She simply sat there, still as a stone, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Then, almost as if she had been waiting for this exact question, she leaned forward slightly. "Regina," Charlotte began, her voice steady and clear, "I know what people expect. I know that wealth is often displayed in the grandest of gestures, but the truth is, wealth isn't just about what you have. It's about how you use it and how you carry it. I don't need to flaunt my money to prove anything. I already have everything I could ever need." Regina's brow furrowed. "You don't want to make your wedding an event that people talk about for years to come." Charlotte smiled faintly, her lips curving up in a way that almost seemed like she was pitying Regina. "What's more important to me is that it's something I talk about for the rest of my life. I want a day where I'm not thinking about how much money I've spent or whether the flowers match the centerpieces. I want it to be about love, Regina, not status." Regina sat back in her chair, stunned. Charlotte's words had hit her like a wave crashing over her, but it was the next thing she said that completely unraveled Regina's understanding of the woman sitting before her. "I've spent my whole life watching my family give away more money than most people could ever dream of making," Charlotte said, her voice growing softer. almost introspective. We've built schools, funded hospitals, helped people around the world. But my grandfather always said, true wealth is not measured by what you have, but by what you do with it. He taught me that long ago, and it's a lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. Regina froze. Her grandfather, she'd heard of the Davenports, of course. They were known for their immense fortune and their philanthropic work. The family had amassed a fortune through a combination of smart investments and groundbreaking business ventures. But what the public didn't know was that much of the family's wealth had been funneled into charitable causes around the world. It wasn't about the lifestyle, it was about making a difference. Charlotte was no ordinary billionaire. She was a part of a legacy built on humility, not excess. Her family didn't live in mansions just to show off their wealth. They used it to help people, to leave a legacy that went beyond materialism. Charlotte had inherited not just a fortune, but a family philosophy that wealth should be a tool, not a symbol. Regina sat there, stunned into silence. She had been so focused on what she thought wealth should look like, that she hadn't stopped to consider what true wealth could mean for someone like Charlotte. Charlotte wasn't rejecting luxury for the sake of being contrary, she was rejecting it because it didn't align with her values. To Charlotte, wealth wasn't a spectacle. It was a resource to be used for good, to help others, to enrich the lives of those who needed it most. Regina swallowed hard, realizing just how wrong she had been. She had been blinded by the superficial trappings of wealth, thinking that the grandeur of a wedding was the only way to define its value. But Charlotte had shown her that the value wasn't in the show, was in the love, the intent, and the connection. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, her eyes softening. I'm not trying to make you feel uncomfortable, Regina. I know this is a lot to take in, but I hope you understand that this is what I need for my wedding. It's not about being flashy or trying to impress anyone. It's about what truly matters. Regina nodded slowly, her mind reeling from the realization. She had thought she knew what wealth meant, but Charlotte had just opened her eyes to something far more profound. I understand now, Regina said quietly. I've been wrong, Charlotte. I was too focused on the wrong things. You've given me something to think about. Charlotte smiled, a serene, knowing smile, and stood up. Thank you for being willing to listen, she said softly. That means more than you know. As Charlotte walked out of the office, Regina sat there in stunned silence, reflecting on the lesson she had just learned. She had spent so many years building a career on the notion that wealth was defined by what people had, by their possessions, their shows of grandeur. But Charlotte had shown her that true wealth was defined by what you do with it, by the impact you make, and by the love you give. Regina had no idea what her next step would be, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer looking at wealth the same way. The following days after her realization were a whirlwind for Regina Matthews. The sleek, high-end world she had once navigated so comfortably now seemed clouded with new questions. She'd always viewed wealth as a tool to create the grandest spectacle imaginable, where a lavish wedding would be a reflection of a person's value. But Charlotte Davenport had shown her a different side of wealth, a side rooted in humility, purpose, and authenticity. Regina sat at her desk, staring out the window of her office, the city's skyline stretching endlessly before her. Her thoughts were heavy, consumed by the conversation she had with Charlotte. She had been humbled in a way she hadn't expected. All these years, she had worked tirelessly to help her clients flaunt their wealth, and in that pursuit, she had forgotten the true meaning of luxury. Charlotte, with her unassuming presence and quiet strength, had reminded her that wealth wasn't about the show, was about the impact it could have on others. Regina's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Charlotte, confirming their next meeting. Regina had known Charlotte was still interested in continuing the planning for her wedding, but the weight of what that would now mean for Regina was hard to ignore. She wasn't just planning a wedding for a billionaire. She was planning a wedding for someone whose view of wealth and life itself was completely different from what Regina had believed to be true. When Charlotte arrived for their meeting, there was no fanfare, no entourage. She walked into Regina's office as simply as she had before, wearing that same modest pale blue dress and a quiet smile. Regina, now acutely aware of the weight Charlotte's presence carried, stood up to greet her. This time, she didn't feel the need to impress or persuade. This time, Regina was ready to listen. Charlotte, Regina began, her voice softer now, full of respect that hadn't been there before. Thank you for your patience. I've thought a lot about our last conversation. Charlotte smiled. "I'm glad you've had time to reflect." "I was wrong," Regina said, the words coming out more easily than she had expected. "I spent so much time trying to convince you that wealth and grandeur were the only way to define a meaningful event. But what you've shown me, you've made me realize, is that true luxury isn't about how much you spend, or how many guests you have, or how extravagant the flowers are. True luxury is about purpose. It's about what the day means, not what it costs." Charlotte's eyes softened as she took a seat. "Thank you for saying that, Regina. I knew this wouldn't be easy to understand, but I'm glad we could have this conversation. My wedding isn't about impressing anyone or living up to some kind of expectation. It's about love, connection, and simplicity, things that can't be bought." Regina felt her chest tighten. It was a truth she had known, on some level, but had buried beneath the weight of societal expectations and the pressure to conform to a certain image of wealth. She had been so focused on creating the perfect show, she had lost sight of the fact that the most important moments in life couldn't be displayed on a platinum platter. They were about feelings, experiences, and memories. "I want this wedding to reflect our values," Charlotte continued, her voice steady. "It's about us, not about what we own. And I trust you to help me create something beautiful, something real." Regina nodded slowly. "I get it now," she said, her voice carrying a weight of understanding. "I will make this wedding as beautiful as possible, true to your vision. And I'll do it in a way that honors what you believe in." The conversation took a turn, as Regina shifted the focus back to the details of the wedding, but there was no longer the same pressure to force grandeur. There was no longer the need to add unnecessary layers to what Charlotte wanted. The simplicity of the ceremony had become its own statement, and Regina had learned how to embrace it. "We can start by narrowing down the venue options," Regina suggested, her tone lighter now. "Something peaceful, a place where you and your partner can have those intimate moments with your loved ones. I think we can find a place that's serene and meaningful. I have a few ideas that might work." Charlotte nodded, her eyes glinting with a quiet excitement. "That sounds perfect." Regina smiled, the first real smile that had come from her in weeks. She could see it now. The wedding wouldn't need a glittering chandelier or a seven-course meal to impress the guests. It wouldn't need to break records or make headlines. What it would need, however, was an environment that felt personal, real, and reflective of Charlotte's values. Regina knew that in this simplicity, the wedding would be something people would talk about, not because of the show, but because of the heartfelt moments shared between the couple and their close family and friends. As the meeting wrapped up, Charlotte stood and extended her hand, this time with a smile that spoke volumes. "Thank you for understanding, Regina. I know this wasn't easy, but I'm glad we're on the same page now." Regina shook her hand, her grip firm. "It's my pleasure, Charlotte. I'm honored to help create this day for you. I can't wait to see it come together." As Charlotte left the office, Regina stood there for a moment, her thoughts racing. "I've just learned one of the most important lessons of my career, and I didn't even know I needed it." She had spent so much of her life building a brand around luxury, around wealth, as an external display of success. She had been so focused on the image of luxury that she had forgotten the heart of it. True luxury wasn't about what you had or how much you spent. It was about authenticity. It was about creating moments that were meaningful, not for anyone else, but for the people involved. Regina looked out the window again, but this time she didn't see the city's skyline as a symbol of what wealth could buy. Instead, she saw it as a reminder of what wealth could do when used for the right reasons. Charlotte had shown her that the truest form of wealth wasn't in the things you owned, but in how you used your resources to make a difference in the lives of others. And for the first time, Regina truly understood what that meant. In the days that followed, Regina poured her heart into planning Charlotte's wedding, no longer concerned with over-the-top gestures or trying to impress the world. She focused on the essence of the day, the love between Charlotte and her partner, the meaningful moments they would share, and the people who would surround them. It wasn't going to be a wedding of flashy displays, but it was going to be a wedding of profound beauty. And for Regina, that was enough. As the wedding day drew closer, Regina knew one thing with certainty. She had been given the opportunity to create something truly special. A wedding that would be remembered, not for its grandeur, but for its grace. For Charlotte's wedding had shown Regina that the greatest luxury of all was the ability to stay true to oneself and create a life filled with love,